Okay, so we're gonna do a bit of an overview of, how to craft the technical projects section of your resume. So as usual, any questions you have, let me know. This is like a session that I kind of came up with my last cohort, and through that, I kind of like organized it this way. So yeah, there's a bunch of information, a lot to think about. And I will say for a resume, there's a lot of fluidity in a resume. It can definitely change almost per job that you apply for. So a lot of these things are like, you'll see is kind of modular, maybe like based on job descriptions, you might change things. But let's just start with an overview. So in your resume, and your career coaches will send you like a template for a resume, you'll see that the main sections will be your work history, employment history, your technical project section, and then like your education section. So today I'm mainly going to talk about the technical project section, because for your employment history, I don't really know what your past jobs were. So that's kind of like up to you and your career. I think your career coach can help you a lot more with that section of your resume. So for technical projects on your data science resume, typically you want to have 3 technical projects. The first section here I put is pick your projects. It's not necessarily so that you choose your last 3 projects of the program, although for most students it happens to be the case, just because the last 3 projects are the ones that you incorporated most of the data science stuff that you've learned. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like your capstone and your like phase 3, 4. It can honestly change. I would say if you are not targeting your resume to a specific field or a specific kind of job, variety is usually good. So yeah, depending on the roles you want, you might want variety. So I know that our phase 3 project was classification, right? And a lot of you are also doing classification for your capstone. So in the case that maybe you don't want to have 2 classification projects on your resume, maybe you include your regression project, your phase 2 project. So it's kind of up to you. And plus, like for every job that you apply for, maybe if you see a job description that you will be using like a bunch of scikit-learn, maybe you want to have 2 classification projects. So it really, really depends on the job. And I would say that if you're in a situation where you can't really decide which of your 5 projects to do, maybe prepare like the descriptions for each so that you can switch out based on the job. So yeah, you can definitely switch out your projects for specific roles on your resume. I have like, I don't know, tons of versions of resumes for like different industries, different kinds of jobs, and I think that's pretty normal. Okay, first off, talk about formatting. This is the formatting taken from the template. I think I only changed the font. You have your project title, preferably in bold, your project URL, like a subtitle or a description, and then usually it's 3, maybe 4 bullet points. It kind of depends on like what fills up the page. So yeah, 3 or 4 bullet points per project, and then you would have 3 of these on your resume. I want to talk about some of these details first. In your project title, I highly recommend against having the words Flatiron School in the project name. Don't call it like Flatiron School Mod 3 project. That's not a good project title. It can be something that's indicative of what the project is. It can be maybe something that you made up if like your project is like some sort of, I don't know, if it's a recommendation system. Maybe you have like a kind of, I don't know, maybe you came up with like a project name. You can use that. You can link your GitHub here. I know that if you do your resume on a Google Doc, and when you put a URL, when you convert into PDF, the URLs actually persist on the PDF, which will be neat. So when you send out your PDF, people can click into your resume, and that'll be really neat. So for your subtitle or your description of your project, and plus here I actually have an example that I'll walk through in a little bit. What kind of project is it? I think one of the more important things here is talk about what kind of project this is. Is it an analysis? So for example, our first project was like a movie data analysis project. Was it regression, classification, rec system, forecasting, time series project? Mention that in the subtitle. Also, if it's relevant, and let me just add this here, if relevant, mention a bit about your business case. So to like ground it in a bit of context. Mention part of your business case. If you created your repo and it had the word like Flatiron School, or it had the word like mod something project, or if you were one of the students that like cloned the repo and worked off of that, you can actually change the titles of your repo to be something more indicative. So that way the URL will be a little bit nicer. It won't have like, I don't know, it won't have like Flatiron School mod 3 project. And then also when you click onto the project on GitHub, it will not have like a not helpful project title. So you can definitely change that on GitHub. So you can change the title of your repo on GitHub to be something more indicative.
I have a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
So in my readmes, I think I often said it was done for the Flatiron School. Should we kind of hide the fact that it was done for Flatiron? Is that kind of what you're, or just like really minimize that idea?
I don't think that you have to hide. I think that is kind of like up to you whether you want to have that or not. I think it's sometimes helpful for people to know whether a project was done as part of a program or if it's something that you're just doing on your own time. That might be something to highlight. It's really kind of up to you and how you want to market the project. I think I recommend against having it in the project title or in the project name, just because that information is not useful and it kind of will crowd out your resume. But in terms of like on the README, mentioning that as part of Flatiron School, I don't think that's a big, it's not as big an issue. Any other questions at this point? All right. I think the bulk of this is going to be talking about project descriptions. Before I get into like exactly what you say, for your descriptions, you know, because you have 3 projects, all the projects that we've done over the past, over this course have had a very similar structure, right? There's like an EDA, then modeling, and then conclusions. And maybe at the start you have like your data gathering, data cleaning. I think even though they have very, very similar like processes, it's important that they don't have the same information, because what's the point of, you know, if you did like very, very intensive modeling for all 3 projects, it's just going to take up space on your resume if you just have like very, very similar speech for all 3 projects. So I think it's important to, you know, pick and choose which projects you want to mention, which bullet points. And that's something that you kind of have to evaluate when you have like your 3 projects all laid out. I will say that for my resume, I first did, you know, my first draft of my resume, I actually added way more bullet points than I actually have on my resume, and then cut them down based on what other projects had, just to make sure that nothing's too repetitive, just to make sure I'm not missing out on any points that I wanted to highlight to future employers. So yeah, try not to be repetitive, just to highlight the breadth. This is just an example of one of mine. As you can see here, I have like my project title. I have the URL. I don't actually have it embedded here, but you can do that on Google Docs. Here I have a subtitle, and my subtitle actually tells me what the project is. So it is a machine learning classifier, that predicts if a Reddit post is more related to art or programming. That was just my like phase 3 project. And here you can see that my 3 bullet points kind of talk about 3 different things. You might question like the structure of it, because I was just rereading this, and I feel like these 3 bullet points by themselves for this one project maybe don't flow as well, but in the greater context of my other projects, I feel like it works better. But I didn't want to share my entire resume because it's been a while since I've reworked on these projects. Anyways, so my first point that I have here, I just wanted to highlight that I trained a lot of different models, that I tuned them and I tested them. So that's a big thing here. I also wanted to highlight that it's from scikit-learn. Also, I used PCA, and that's something that I wanted to highlight as well. And then I talked about my pre-processing step, because I thought that, like, at least to me, and relative to like the data sets that I've seen, I think that 40,000 is like a good amount of data. And so I wanted to highlight that it was a lot of data that I was working with. And I achieved a score with a particular kind of model. And then lastly, what I did for this project, and I will also admit that this was something that I did after I graduated. So any of these things that I mentioned that that you maybe think like, ooh, it would be good for me to have something like this on my resume, you can always go back to one of your old projects and add that in. So one of the things that I did for this project after I graduated was I went back and I like turned everything into like a pipeline. I just built like a series of functions to do everything automatically. And then also I built like a Flask web app. This I'll actually talk about next week. Questions about this example before I get into like more general for any project? What are the things that you could talk about?
One quick question, Yish.
Mhm.
So do we have to change the the resume all the time, or maybe like whenever we are applying for different places?
I think it's good to have, so the way I did mine is I had one like regular resume, which is like if there was a day that I was going to apply to like a bunch of jobs that I'm seeing on LinkedIn, for example, I would just use the same resume. If there were like particular jobs that I like really, really wanted, or I was more serious about, and I really wanted to like, you know, highlight different things based on the job description, then I would change those. But I always had like some bullet points like saved somewhere in a different document to like exchange whenever I felt was appropriate. That's a good question. Yeah, I feel like something that I've done, yeah, I have like another Google Doc because on my resume only like I can fit only 3 bullet points per project. And based on, let's say there was a job that I was applying for that was more focused on creating pipelines, then I would put more of those kind of languages over something like modeling, just as an example. Cool. Anything else?
I have a follow-up question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so yeah, you talk about doing different resumes for different employers like that. So how do you keep track of them all? I mean, just as like a logistical thing, like, you know, you have,
Yeah.
I've done in the past, like resume 40, resume 45, like, is there a way to sort of how it organized, or do you have your own system at least?
I do have my own system actually, and I feel pretty proud of this, but so my resume actually lives on a Google Doc. And then I have one Google Doc with like my full resume. I have another document with like backup data points. And on Google Doc, every time I need to export my resume or every time I need to make a change to my resume, I will export the version of the resume that I want on Google Docs. So here you can download as a PDF, and then it exports your resume as a PDF. And then that PDF, I will actually save it with the name of the company that I was submitting it for, as if it's something specific. Or if it's not like a specific company, because I teach, for a while I was applying for like teaching roles as well. So for any of like my teaching resumes, I would be like, all right, resume teaching or education. And so I end up with, go ahead.
It was, you have one master and then one of like a lot of little bullet points that you kind of shuffle in and out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. So yeah, I would say like my master resume is the Google Doc. And then every time like I want to use like a different version of it, I will just go to the Google Doc, make an edit, and then export.
As a separate document.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then on my computer, I just have like a folder with all of my different resumes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I will say, it's also a good practice to like once in a while clean out your resumes. I like at one point had like 20 different versions, and then as you all know, like I forgot if I told you all, I started graduate school earlier this year, and then basically I cleaned out any resume that didn't have like my graduate school information on it. So that's something that also helps to keep organized, so you don't have just like resumes from like 2 years ago sitting around.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? All right, so let's get into the section of just talking about, you know, based on your project, what are some words and phrases that you would use? And I like separated this out into different sections based on, you know, the parts of the data science process that we use in our projects. But I feel like you don't always have to do it in this order. For some projects, I like put my metrics right at the top. For some projects, I don't know, it really depends on what I'm trying to highlight. So they don't have to be in any specific order. So to start, let's talk about like data wrangling and EDA. I would say projects that you would want to highlight your data wrangling and EDA. If you, for some reason, want to use your first project, let's say you're going for more of like a data analyst role where you want to like, for any job description that you see has more of a visualizations component, I think that's a good project to use. And that's one that you want to highlight like your EDA. So a couple things to note. If your data set is fairly large, I think it's a good idea to mention the number. I know some of you for your capstones are working with very, very big data sets, like hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of rows. That's a good thing to talk about. You don't have to give the exact number. You can definitely like round it up or down. I remember for this project, I actually had exactly 40,000, but if I had a little bit more, I would do like 40,000 plus. So yeah, in terms of number, that's how I like to do it.
Sorry, what would roughly be considered like a large number? Like would 15,000 be a large project, or?
I think 15,000 is a good number to mention. I think I would say as long as it's more than a couple thousand, it's a good number. I think this is very subjective and also relative to like your own projects. But yeah, if it's less than a couple thousand, I might not mention it. But that's my opinion. All right. So yeah, some of the data wrangling buzzwords that I like to use, I will say for this project, I actually used like a data set. So I didn't have much to mention here, but some buzzwords that I like to use and that I've seen in other projects. If you use an API, use the word queried. If you web scrape, say web scraped. I actually particularly like this word, synthesized. If you had, data from different sources that you ended up using together, you synthesized a data set of however many rows. I like that one a lot. And then yeah, pre-process is also another. I think I used pre-process a couple times here. If you want to highlight your EDA, again, if you want to like focus your resume more or focus that project on more of like an analyst or like visualization kind of, if you want to highlight that part of your project, derived insights, oops, what did I do here? Yeah, performed extensive pre-modeling, exploratory data analysis. You can definitely use the phrase EDA in your resume as well. So yeah, if you have like a business case that you were supporting here, I would mention that as well. Perhaps mention business case if relevant. All right. I would think that unless it's maybe like the first project that we did, I think one line on like your data wrangling or EDA should be good enough. Questions about this? All right. Next, let's talk about modeling. For the modeling section, I think most of the later, especially the later projects that we did have some modeling component. I think it's important to mention these points. The most important thing, and the thing that when I see resumes without this, I'm like, okay, but there's no indication of how well your project did, is a metric. How well did your model perform? I think there's a bit of a misconception of like, you don't always have to tell it, your best score. Of course, if your score is like a pretty high number, that's good. You want to mention that. But another way that you can mention your score, so let's say, your best model ended up doing like, maybe you had a lot of classes and then you ended up with like a 50% accuracy. One really good way of contextualizing that number is with a baseline, which is why I've been telling you all to use baseline models. So another way to do it is if there's a significant increase from a baseline due to your tuning or feature engineering, mention that first of all. So let's say you ran your baseline models and your baseline metrics were like 20%, but you managed to raise it to 50%. That's actually 150% increase. So you can say something like that. Let me actually put that as an example. If you raised from 20% accuracy to 50%, that's a 150% increase. So that's just one way to make your number just immediately sound more impressive. Also, based on your problem or business case, you can sort of phrase it differently. You don't always have to like, outright mention, accuracy score of whatever, or F1 score or whatever. I think another pretty neat way is, let's say for I don't think anyone in this class did it, I forget. But for the phase 4 project, there was the X-ray detection. So for the pneumonia detection, that was one of the data sets. Some people decided to focus on recall, I think because there was like a class imbalance or whatever. Instead of saying like, I got a 97% recall rate, maybe you can say something like correctly diagnosed 97% of pneumonia X-rays in my unseen data. And that really just translates to, my test recall was 97%. So this way it kind of like grounds your metric in a little bit more context rather than just like, spitting high numbers. Because for something like, detecting disease or viruses, I think, phrasing it this way is a little bit more contextually appropriate, I think. Other scenarios of things that you can mention. Did you test many models? Like in my example here, I did like, I think all 9 models that we had learned in like phase 3. And so if it's more than 4 or 5, you can definitely mention how many different models you used. If you used fewer, let me put that here. You might want to mention which models you tested. Mention which models you tested. So yeah, I think for especially the later projects, a lot of you tried like multiple different like classification or regression models. Even in time series, for a time series, a lot of you did like ARIMA models, technically AR models, MA models, ARIMA, Facebook Profit. These are all different models, so you can also mention these as well. Cool. What else do I have here? Did you build a function to automate the modeling process? This is something I remember emphasizing that you all try to do, especially for your later projects. If you automated something, I think it's worth mentioning that. There are a lot of companies, especially from more traditional industries, that are starting to get more into, getting more, I guess, tech savvy. They're looking to automate a lot of their processes. And so I think just having the word automation there is good. So yeah, keywords you can use here. You automated something, or you built or created a pipeline for model training and testing or model evaluation based on, what you actually did. For model testing or evaluation. Type. There we go. Let's see. What did I say here? What's this blue line? All right. Something else is, did you come up with actionable recommendations for your business case from your model or through post-modeling EDA? Especially if your project is something that's very like directly applicable, like something like a recommendation system or something like, detecting disease or fraud detection, things like that. I feel like you can ground it a lot more in context. And if you were able to derive, some insights or recommendations for that, I think is worth mentioning too. So yeah, did you come up with actionable recommendations either through like, feature importances, or maybe after feature importances, you did some like post-modeling EDA based on the patterns you were seeing? You can definitely talk about that. I think derived is a good word, just personally. I think there are definitely a lot of other synonyms that you can use here. Questions about this? I think this can take up like 2 lines or even more if you have space on your resume, just because I think a bulk of the time, a bulk of like the conceptual stuff that we did fell under modeling. So any questions about this? All right. So here are some other things that are outside of the typical data science process that you might want to add. If you created a front end, and by the way, next week I'll be talking about like creating front ends. If you created a front end, I think it's a good idea to mention, I would say mention like the framework that you use, the library or framework. And by that, I mean, and this will make more sense next week, but did you use Flask? Did you use Dash or Jupyter Dash? Did you use, what's the other one? Streamlit? That's another one that I will talk about. So yeah, if you use any of these, I think it's good to like mention specifically which one you ended up using. Other things that you can do. Oh, question?
One question. Does Voila come under dash? Voila.
I'm not sure. I don't think so. I know that is like more of like the interact in your notebook, right?
Yeah.
I don't. It doesn't
make it live.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it doesn't fall
Then-
under Dash, but I think, at least I think it doesn't fall under Dash. I forget. I personally don't really use it, but I would say just mention it anyways because you're able to have interactive element that is just more user friendly for people, especially if you're doing something that is more of like an analytics role. A lot of it is making your data easily accessible and understandable by other stakeholders. And so, your ability to like make this interactive element is going to be something that is worth highlighting, I think. Cool. Another thing is, did you utilize any SQL or did you create your own SQL database? I talked about this, a few weeks ago. I think most of you didn't do it, but it could be something that you decide to add to one of your projects in the future, just to have, SQL as part of one of your projects. This is actually a point that I found from one of my students that I thought was really smart. If you ended up working with someone else, and I know like towards the beginning, we did a little bit of pair work, you can definitely mention that. I think that's something that's very valuable. I think companies and employers do value your ability to work with others. If you did, you can mention maybe like, how did you have like regular meetings, certain keywords here. There are two main like frameworks of like working with other people, Agile and Scrum, are like daily stand-ups. So doing daily stand-ups is part of, I forget if it's part of Scrum or part of Agile. But our daily stand-ups is something that a lot of companies do.
Scrum.
It's part of Scrum? Okay, yeah. Awesome, yeah. So if, you guys also participate in kind of daily stand-ups on our Slack channel. But yeah, I think it's something that, could be something that you want to highlight on your resume as part of your projects. The fact that you were able to, have a good teamwork, like an organized teamwork process or workflow. I think that might be something you want to mention, especially if there's something you can't think of and if it's one of the projects that you worked with someone else on. One more thing, did you create a dashboard? Possible keywords here. I like the word designed and populated a dashboard. I think a lot of what comes into making dashboards is making your data be presented in a very easy to read and efficient way. And there is a little bit of like dashboard, there is some design element there. And I think it's important, especially, again, this is more for like the analyst roles where you might be creating dashboards, especially if the role includes something like, doing like Tableau. I know we didn't talk about Tableau, but if it involves just some creating of presentations, I think, doing dashboard design could be something that you highlight as well. Questions about any of these? All right. Before I talk about like this last little bit about like the education, I think that, there's a lot of information that you can put on your resume, right? Across 3 different projects, you probably only end up with 9 bullet points of space to talk about what you did. So I think it's a good idea to, the reason why I have like this bank of bullet points that I can switch out here and there is just so that, I can cater my resume to specific jobs. But yeah, I think, yes, you want to highlight the important parts of every project, but it's also good to think about your 3 projects together. And you don't want to have like too many overlapping points across your projects. Cool. Any questions about like creating your project descriptions? All right. For your resume, if you end up doing it on Google Docs, and you want me to take a look, actually, if you want me to take a look at your resume, do it in Google Docs, because on Google Docs it's easy for me to like add comments and like edit things. So yeah, if you want me to take a look at your resume, the easiest way is to just send me a Google Doc link. And then I'm more than happy to like look through and add my comments to it. I spent like a lot of time looking at data science resumes for like Flatiron School students and like hiring other Flatiron School instructors too. All right. One last thing that I wanted to mention is under your education section, a lot of people have questions of like, how should I label Flatiron School? I don't think it matters too much exactly what the verbiage is, but this is just what's on my resume. I just put like Flatiron School, Immersive Data Science Bootcamp, how long I did it for. Mine says New York, but you can put online. If I was in like an online program, I would say something like this, like full or part-time online data science bootcamp instead of immersive. I know some people like to add the word like intensive in there. I think on the certificate, I think it says this verbiage. So if you just want it to match the certificate, I think I'll double check for you all, but I believe this is what it says. Cool. Well, that's all I had to share with regards to resumes. Any like overall resume questions, and then I can end this recording. All right, then let me stop here.